What's up, everybody? Welcome to Sports Magazine Collector. I'm Brad, and today I'm going to help you determine whether or not you should send your Sports Illustrated magazine in to be graded by CGC. All right, one of the most common questions that I see from new collectors in this hobby: should I get this graded? I'm going to share some general guidelines to help you determine if your copy of Sports Illustrated is worthy or not of being graded. So, to help with this, I'm going to break the Sports Illustrated magazines into four categories, and the categories are 50s and 60s newsstands, 70s and 80s newsstands, 90s to present newsstands, and lastly, subscription issues. Now, please understand that these guidelines are just that. They are guidelines, they're suggestions. And these general suggestions that I'm about to give you are based on if it would be financially worth it for you to have your magazine graded. And with that, let's briefly review the current prices to have magazines graded by CGC. CGC requires you to pay to have an annual account, and they have several tiered options. So for the sake of this video, I'm just going to assume that you have already signed up and paid to have an account with CGC. Therefore, we will take that registration fee out of the picture as far as determining our worth and our value. So for the different options for grading, we're going to focus only on the two cheapest options, modern and economy. And of course, you can pay more to go standard or walk through and have much shorter wait times. But in most cases, you only want to do that if you have a magazine of significant value. So the options we're going to be looking at are $32 per any issue from 1975 to present, which is referred to as modern, and then $42 for any issue 1974 or earlier, which is referred to as economy. Now, we also need to factor in a little bit for shipping. And if you're just going to send one magazine by itself, it's usually about $20, but I like to send orders in of multiple, like groups of 5, and therefore that kind of reduces the cost of shipping per item. So just for the sake of keeping the math really easy, we're going to say that each modern issue from 75 or later is going to run you about $40 per magazine, including shipping, and each economy issue from 74 or before is going to run you about $50 per magazine, including shipping. Okay, so now that we've got the logistics covered, let's jump into the general guidelines to help you determine whether or not your Sports Illustrated should be graded. All right, starting with our first category of newsstand issues from the 50s and 60s, rule number one: anything 9.0 or greater. So, in order to determine if your issues are worth grading, you're going to have to teach yourself the skill of self grading. You're going to need to learn to make your own projections about what you think your grade will be. Now, of course, if you're a brand new collector, that can sometimes be pretty difficult if you've never actually had an issue graded. But a couple things that you can do to improve would be to watch videos from other collectors where they reveal their grades, or even study pictures of magazines online that have already been graded and see what the grade is compared to all the flaws that you can spot. If you do those things, you can usually get good enough to at least get within like a one full CGC point of the actual grade. But you do have to remember, be very conservative about your estimates, because we often tend to be a little bit overly optimistic about our own issues. So back to the rule at hand: anything 9.0 or greater for newsstand Sports Illustrated from the 50s or 60s is going to be worth grading. And when I say any issue, I mean any issue. Remember, these magazines are anywhere from 50 to 70 years old. Newsstand copies from this period are rare, and they are especially rare in good condition. So even if you have a cover that doesn't seem very collectible, if it were to come back at a 9.0 or higher from this time period, it would have some value regardless. Let's look at an example. Here's an issue from 1959 showing duck season. This would definitely not be considered a collectible cover. But once again, with it being over 60 years old, if you happen to have a newsstand copy that was in great condition of 9.0 or higher, that, in my opinion, would be worth grading. Think about it from the perspective of set collectors. At some point, there's likely going to be a collector who's looking to have a graded copy of every single Sports Illustrated issue. Or maybe they only want every issue from the 50s. This is extremely common in sports cards, where even vintage cards of non-stars can have some value when in high grade because collectors are looking to complete a set. And how about this? This issue specifically, as of today, has only been graded one time ever, and it was a 5.5. So if you think you've got a 9.0 or higher of Dawn and a Duck season, grade that sucker. Rule number two for 50s and 60s newsstands: grade any issue with a Hall of Famer or star on the cover. Once again, these issues are 50 to 70 years old. They're extremely hard to find in newsstand. So if you have any cover from this era and it features a Hall of Famer or a star on the cover, I think that it's worth grading regardless of the grade. High-end Hall of Famers are obvious: Mickey Mantle, Johnny Unitas, Wilt Chamberlain. But let's look at an example of a lower end star. Here's a 1963 cover of Whitey Ford. Now, Whitey's a Hall of Famer, but he's what I would consider more of a mid to low end Hall of Famer. This is not his first cover, so it doesn't have any special significance there, but he is a Hall of Famer, and there just are not many of these still out there. In fact, it's so rare, I couldn't even find a photo of a newsstand copy. As of today, this cover has only been graded one time, and it's a 7.5. So if I was a Whitey Ford fan, I would be thrilled to find a newsstand copy of this cover, regardless of the grade, even if it came back a 1.0. Rule number 3 for any 50s or 60s newsstand: grade any cover with a semi-star that's a 7.5 or greater. Need I repeat myself? These things are 50 to 70 years old, and they're really hard to find in newsstand. Let's take a look at an example of someone who's a non-Hall of Famer but could fall into this category of semi-star. Here's a cover from 1968, and it's the first Sports Illustrated cover for Denny McLain. Now, McLain is not in the Hall of Fame, but he was a 3-time All-Star and a 2-time Cy Young winner. He's actually also the last pitcher in MLB history to win 30 games in a season. This is someone that in 2022 I would consider a semi-star. And with this issue being 54 years old, I think any copy graded 7.5 or higher would be worth grading. And in fact, if you look at the pop reports, as of today, this specific issue has never been graded. Moving on to our second category: newsstand issues from the 1970s and the 1980s. Rule number 1 for this era: grade anything that looks like it could be a 9.8. Listen, 9.8s bring value, period. It doesn't matter what the issue is. If you have a newsstand copy that is absolutely flawless, send it in. Let's look at an example. Here's kind of a weird cover from 1984 that doesn't even have an athlete on the front. Not much collectability to this one at all, but if you had it in a 9.8, someone would pay for it. Rule number 2 for this era: grade any cover featuring Michael Jordan or Wayne Gretzky. MJ and Gretzky are two goats of their sports who played a good portion of their careers in the 1980s. Michael had 10 covers in the 80s, Gretzky had 9. Any newsstand copies of these issues, regardless of the condition, are safe to be graded, in my opinion. Rule number 3 for newsstands from the 70s or 80s: grade any cover with a Hall of Famer or star that would be a 7.0 or higher. Here's an example. This is Franco Harris from 1979. It's not his first cover, but still, if you have this issue at a 7.0, I would estimate it to be worth anywhere from $50 to $70, therefore making it worth the grading cost. Rule number 4 for the 70s and 80s: grade any cover with a semi-star that would come in at a 9.0 or higher. Here's an example. Fernando Valenzuela. This is from 1985. Valenzuela was a 6-time All-Star and he won 1 Cy Young, but he's not a Hall of Famer. This issue graded at an 8.5 probably would be pushing it as far as getting your value back, but sitting at a 9.0 with a semi-star, you would be in good shape. And the final rule for newsstands from the 70s and 80s: grade any first cover of a Hall of Famer or star with a pop count under 20. This is Hall of Famer Nate Tiny Archibald, and it's his first cover from 1973. You're following the previous rule, this would need to be a 7.0 or higher to grade. But because this is a first cover and it's a Hall of Famer, and because the pop counts are so low, I think this is worth grading at any grade. And in fact, this specific issue has never been graded before. So even if you had this in a 1.0, in my opinion, it's worth the grade. Group number 3, newsstand issues from 1990 to present. Rule number 1 for this era: once again, grade anything that looks like a 9.8. Yes, even for modern issues, this rule still applies. 9.8s are always king. Rule number 2 for 1990s to present: grade any cover with a Hall of Famer or star that looks like it would come in at a 9.0 or higher. When looking at modern issues, you really want a 9.0 or greater. Let's take this 1995 Steve Young, for example. At 9.0, you've got quite a bit of collectability, but an 8.5, it's a drop in value that may not make it worth grading. Rule number 3 for 1990s to present: grade any first cover of a Hall of Famer or star that would come in 8.0 or higher. First covers carry extra premiums. Take this Patrick Mahomes first cover, for example. It's only a few years old from 2018, but with Mahomes' star status, you could still get more than $40 of value out of an 8.0. Rule number 4 for 1990s to present: grade any first cover of a Hall of Famer or star with a pop count under 10. Some covers, despite their modern status, are still really rare and hard to find in newsstand. This Russell Wilson first cover from 2013, for example, is a regional variant and it's only been graded one time. If you find a copy of this in any condition, grade it. And now for the final category, subscription issues. So first off, are subscription issues ever worth grading? Yes, absolutely. Just be aware. A good rule of thumb is that subscription issues are typically only going to carry about 10% of value of a newsstand, unless it's a blank box subscription, in which case you might be able to get up to 50% of the value of a newsstand. Rule number 1 for subscription issues, once again, grade anything that would come back a 9.8. Don't forget, 9.8s are king. Whether or not it has a mailing label, people will always pay for a 9.8. Rule number 2 for subscription issues. If you have an elite first cover and it's from before 1990 and it would come in at a 7.0 or higher, it may be worth grading. Now, when I say elite first covers, there are only a handful that I'm referring to. This would apply to Mickey Mantle, Muhammad Ali, Michael Jordan, Wayne Gretzky, Roberto Clemente, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, and maybe a few others, but that's the echelon that we're talking about. A subscription issue of one of those guys' first covers graded at 7.0 or higher would still bring a little bit of value. But let's take a slightly lower tier Hall of Famer, such as someone like David Robinson. A subscription copy of David Robinson's first cover is likely not going to carry much value unless it's up in the 9.8 range. Last rule for subscriptions: any blank box subscription of a Hall of Famer or star, and it's their first cover, that would come in at a 9.0 or higher. Now remember, Sports Illustrated started printing labels directly on the cover somewhere around 1994, so you're only going to have blank box subscriptions from around 1994 and later. This is Aaron Judge's first cover, and it has a blank box subscription. If you had this in a 9.0 or higher, I would say that has collectability and some value. Okay, those are all the guidelines for my 4 categories of Sports Illustrateds, but there's one more very important reason why you should get a magazine graded, and that is if you love the cover. Listen, all the guidelines I listed were out of the idea from financial value and making sure that you would cover your costs for grading in case you ever decided to sell. What if you don't want to sell? What if you just love a cover because it has some sort of special meaning to you? Then grade it. For example, I'm a University of Illinois alum, and one of my favorite all-time covers is this 2005 cover featuring D. Brown. It's not super collectible, wouldn't have all that much value, but for me, it's one that I love and I would be very happy to display regardless of condition. Also, here's one that my brother asked me to send in for him. This is Peerless Price. Very good college career, pretty average NFL career, not necessarily a cover that would be considered real collectible, but my brother's a UT grad and he loves anything volunteers. So slab what makes you happy, slab what you like. The grade may mean absolutely nothing to you, but you just want to preserve your magazine. You want it to stay in good condition and you want to display it in the case. Go for it. I'm a collector first all the way, and I think that that type of approach is awesome. So there you go. Let's do a real quick recap of my guidelines for when you should grade a Sports Illustrated magazine with CGC. First off, if it's from the 50s or 60s and it's a newsstand, grade anything that would come back 9.0 or higher. Grade any cover with a Hall of Famer or star, and grade any cover with a borderline star that would come back 7.5 or higher. A 70s or 80s newsstand, anything that would be a 9.8, any Jordan or Gretzky from this era, any cover with a Hall of Famer or star that would be 7.0 or higher, any cover with a borderline star that would be 9.0 or higher, and any Hall of Famer or star first cover with a very low pop count under 20. 90s to present newsstands, any 9.8, any Hall of Famer or star that would be 9.0 or higher, any Hall of Famer or star first cover 8.0 or higher, and any Hall of Famer or star first cover with a very low pop count under 10. Lastly, subscription, anything 9.8, any elite first cover before 1990 that would come in at a 7.0 or greater, and any blank box subscription of a Hall of Famer or star first cover that would come in at a 9.0 or higher. So notice how with these guidelines, there are a lot of kind of similarities and trends from different eras. For example, you could find the most oddball, non-collectible looking cover that you've ever seen, but if it's from the 50s and 60s and it comes back 9.0 or greater, to me, that's worth grading. Whereas if it's from any other era, basically 70s, 80s, 90s to present or subscription, you're only going to want to grade that odd cover if it's a 9.8. When it comes to a cover with a Hall of Famer or star, you're going to want to grade any of those, regardless of the condition, from the 50s and 60s, just because they're so old and so rare. Once you move to the 70s and 80s, probably want to stick to issues that are going to be a 7.0 or higher. And then when you move to the more modern 90s to present, they need to be a 9.0 or higher. When it comes to borderline stars, you should be fine grading anything from the 50s or 60s. It would come back 7.5 or higher. And from the 70s or 80s, it would come back 9.0 or higher. Probably not going to be worth it to grade any cover with a borderline star that's from the 90s to present or that's a subscription issue. And remember, when it comes to value, pop counts do matter. If you have a key first cover and the pop counts are extremely low, it may be worth it to grade the issue regardless of its condition. And most importantly, don't forget, if you like the cover, grade it. Now let me emphasize, these guidelines are not the end-all be-all. There will always be some exceptions to the rules. These are just some very generalized and basic suggestions to help the average collector assess whether or not their Sports Illustrated magazine should be graded. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you think. I appreciate likes, comments, subscribes, and until the next video, see you guys next time.